Chapter 21. Shod in prunella boots over grey silk stockings, in a gown of handsome corded silk, her hair in smooth bands under a very pretty black velvet bonnet, lined with yellow satin, Lisbeth made her way to the Rue Saint-Dominique by the Boulevard des Invalides, wondering whether sheer dejection would at last break down Hortense's brave spirit, and whether Sarmatian instability, taken at a moment when, with such a character, everything is possible, would be too much for Steinbock's constancy. Hortense and Wenceslas had the ground floor of a house situated at the corner of the Rue Saint-Dominique and the Esplanade des Invalides. These rooms, once in harmony with the honeymoon, now had that half-new, half-faded look that may be called the autumnal aspect of furniture. Newly married folks are as lavish and wasteful, without knowing it or intending it, of everything about them as they are of their affection. Thinking only of themselves, they reck little of the future, which at a later time weighs on the mother of a family. Lisbeth found Hortense just as she had finished dressing a baby Wenceslas, who had been carried into the garden. "Good morning, Betty," said Hortense, opening the door herself to her cousin. The cook was gone out, and the house servant, who was also the nurse, was doing some washing. "Good morning, dear child," replied Lisbeth, kissing her. "Is Wenceslas in the studio?" she added in a whisper. "No, he is in the drawing-room, talking to Stidmann and Schaunard." "Can we be alone?" asked Lisbeth. "Come into my room." In this room the hangings of pink-flowered chintz with green leaves on a white ground, constantly exposed to the sun, were much faded, as was the carpet. The muslin curtains had not been washed for many a day. The smell of tobacco hung about the room. For Wenceslas, now an artist of repute, and born a fine gentleman, left his cigar ash on the arms of the chairs and the prettiest pieces of furniture, as a man does to whom love allows everything, a man rich enough to scorn vulgar carefulness. "Now then, let us talk over your affairs," said Lisbeth, seeing her pretty cousin silent in the armchair into which she had dropped. "But what ails you? You look rather pale, my dear." "Two articles have just come out in which my poor Wenceslas is pulled to pieces. I have read them, but I have hidden them from him, for they would completely depress him. The marble statue of Marshal Montcornet is pronounced utterly bad. The bas-reliefs are allowed to pass muster, simply to allow of the most perfidious praise of his talent as a decorative artist, and to give the greater emphasis to the statement that serious art is quite out of his reach. Stidmann, whom I besought to tell me the truth, broke my heart by confessing that his own opinion agreed with that of every other artist, of the critics and the public. He said to me in the garden before breakfast, if Wenceslas cannot exhibit a masterpiece next season, he must give up heroic sculpture and be content to execute idyllic subjects, small figures, pieces of jewelry, and high-class goldsmith's work. This verdict is dreadful to me, for Wenceslas, I know, will never accept it. He feels he has so many fine ideas." "Ideas will not pay the tradesman's bills," remarked Lisbeth. "I was always telling him so. Nothing but money. Money is only to be had for work done, things that ordinary folks like well enough to buy them. When an artist has to live and keep a family, he had far better have a design for a candlestick on his counter, or for a fender or a table, than for groups or statues. Everybody must have such things, while he may wait months for the admirer of the group, and for his money." "You are right, my good Lisbeth. Tell him all that. I have not the courage. Besides, as he was saying to Stidmann, if he goes back to ornamental work and small sculpture, he must give up all hope of the Institute and grand works of art, and we should not get the 300,000 francs worth of work promised at Versailles and by the city of Paris and the ministers. That is what we are robbed of by those dreadful articles, written by rivals who want to step into our shoes." "And that is not what you dreamed of, poor little puss," said Lisbeth, kissing Hortense on the brow. "You expected to find a gentleman, a leader of art, the chief of all living sculptors. But that is poetry, you see, a dream requiring 50,000 francs a year, and you have only 2,400, so long as I live. After my death, 3,000. A few tears rose to Hortense's eyes, and Lisbeth drank them with her eyes as a cat laps milk. This is the story of their honeymoon. The tale will perhaps not be lost on some artists. Intellectual work, labor in the upper regions of mental effort, is one of the grandest achievements of man. That which deserves real glory in art, for by art we must understand every creation of the mind, is courage above all things, a sort of courage of which the vulgar have no conception, and which has never perhaps been described till now. Driven by the dreadful stress of poverty, goaded by Lisbeth, and kept by her in blinders, as a horse is, to hinder it from seeing to the right and left of its road, lashed on by that hard woman, the personification of necessity, a sort of deputy fate, Wenceslas, a born poet and dreamer, had gone on from conception to execution, and overleaped, without sounding it, the gulf that divides these two hemispheres of art. To muse, to dream, to conceive of fine works is a delightful occupation. It is like smoking a magic cigar, or leading the life of a courtesan who follows her own fancy. The work then floats in all the grace of infancy, in the mad joy of conception, with the fragrant beauty of a flower and the aromatic juices of a fruit enjoyed in anticipation. The man who can sketch his purpose beforehand in words is regarded as a wonder, and every artist and writer possesses that faculty. But gestation, fruition, the laborious rearing of the offspring, putting it to bed every night full fed with milk, embracing it anew every morning with the inexhaustible affection of a mother's heart, licking it clean, dressing it 100 times in the richest garb only to be instantly destroyed, then never to be cast down at the convulsions of this headlong life till the living masterpiece is perfected, which in sculpture speaks to every eye, in literature to every intellect, in painting to every memory, in music to every heart. This is the task of execution. The hand must be ready at every instant to come forward and obey the brain. But the brain has no more a creative power at command than love has a perennial spring. The habit of creativeness, the indefatigable love of motherhood which makes a mother, that miracle of nature which Raphael so perfectly understood, the maternity of the brain, in short, which is so difficult to develop, is lost with prodigious ease. Inspiration is the opportunity of genius. She does not indeed dance on the razor's edge. She is in the air and flies away with the suspicious swiftness of a crow. She wears no scarf by which the poet can clutch her. Her hair is a flame. She vanishes like the lovely rose and white flamingo, the sportsman's despair. And work, again, is a weariful struggle, alike dreaded and delighted in by these lofty and powerful natures, who are often broken by it. A great poet of our day has said, in speaking of this overwhelming labor, "I sit down to it in despair, but I leave it with regret." Be it known to all who are ignorant. If the artist does not throw himself into his work as Curtius sprang into the gulf, as a soldier leads a forlorn hope without a moment's thought, and if when he is in the crater he does not dig on as a miner does when the earth has fallen in on him, if he contemplates the difficulties before him instead of conquering them one by one, like the lovers in fairy tales who to win their princesses overcome ever new enchantments, the work remains incomplete. It perishes in the studio where creativeness becomes impossible, and the artist looks on at the suicide of his own talent. Rossini, a brother genius to Raphael, is a striking instance in his poverty-stricken youth, compared with his latter years of opulence. This is the reason why the same prize, the same triumph, the same bays are awarded to great poets and to great generals. Wenceslas, by nature a dreamer, had expended so much energy in production, in study, and in work under Lisbeth's despotic rule, that love and happiness resulted in reaction. His real character reappeared, the weakness, recklessness, and indolence of the Sarmatian returned to nestle in the comfortable corners of his soul, whence the schoolmaster's rod had routed them. For the first few months the artist adored his wife. Hortense and Wenceslas abandoned themselves to the happy childishness of a legitimate and unbounded passion. Hortense was the first to release her husband from his labors, proud to triumph over her rival, his art. And indeed a woman's caresses scare away the muse, and break down the sturdy, brutal resolution of the worker. 6 or 7 months slipped by, and the artist's fingers had forgotten the use of the modeling tool. When the need for work began to be felt, when the Prince de Wissembourg, president of the committee of subscribers, asked to see the statue, Wenceslas spoke the inevitable byword of the idler: "I am just going to work on it." And he lulled his dear Hortense with fallacious promises and the magnificent schemes of the artist as he smokes. Hortense loved her poet more than ever. She dreamed of a sublime statue of Marshal Montcornet. Montcornet would be the embodied ideal of bravery, the type of the cavalry officer, of courage à la Murat. Yes, yes, at the mere sight of that statue all the Emperor's victories were to seem a foregone conclusion. And then such workmanship! The pencil was accommodating and answered to the word. By way of a statue, the result was a delightful little Wenceslas. When the progress of affairs required that he should go to the studio at Le Gros Caillou to mould the clay and set up the life-size model, Steinbock found, one day, that the prince's clock required his presence in the workshop of Florent and Chenor, where the figures were being finished. Or, again, the light was grey and dull. To-day he had business to do. To-morrow they had a family dinner, to say nothing of indispositions of mind and body, and the days when he stayed at home to toy with his adored wife. Marshal the Prince de Wissembourg was obliged to be angry to get the clay model finished. He declared that he must put the work into other hands. It was only by dint of endless complaints and much strong language that the committee of subscribers succeeded in seeing the plaster cast. Day after day Steinbock came home, evidently tired, complaining of this hodman's work and his own physical weakness. During that first year the household felt no pinch. The Countess Steinbock, desperately in love with her husband, cursed the War Minister. She went to see him. She told him that great works of art were not to be manufactured like cannon, and that the State, like Louis XIV, Francis I, and Leo X, ought to be at the beck and call of genius. Poor Hortense, believing she held a Phidias in her embrace, had the sort of motherly cowardice for her Wenceslas that is in every wife who carries her love to the pitch of idolatry. "Do not be hurried," said she to her husband. "Our whole future life is bound up with that statue. Take your time and produce a masterpiece." She would go to the studio, and then the enraptured Steinbock wasted 5 hours out of 7 in describing the statue instead of working at it. He thus spent 18 months in finishing the design, which to him was all important. When the plaster was cast and the model complete, poor Hortense, who had looked on at her husband's toil, seeing his health really suffer from the exertions which exhaust a sculptor's frame and arms and hands, Hortense thought the result admirable. Her father, who knew nothing of sculpture, and her mother, no less ignorant, lauded it as a triumph. The War Minister came with them to see it, and, overruled by them, expressed approval of the figure, standing as it did alone, in a favourable light, thrown up against a green baize background. Alas, at the Exhibition of 1841, The disapprobation of the public soon took the form of abuse and mockery in the mouths of those who were indignant with the idol too hastily set up for worship. Stidmann tried to advise his friend, but was accused of jealousy. Every article in a newspaper was to Hortense an outcry of envy. Stidmann, the best of good fellows, got articles written in which adverse criticism was contravened, and it was pointed out that sculptors altered their works in translating the plaster into marble, and that the marble would be the test. "In reproducing the plaster sketch in marble," wrote Claude Vignon, "a masterpiece may be ruined or a bad design made beautiful. The plaster is the manuscript, the marble is the book." So in 2 years and a half Wenceslas had produced a statue and a son. The child was a picture of beauty. The statue was execrable. The clock for the prince and the price of the statue paid off the young couple's debts. Steinbach had acquired fashionable habits. He went to the play, to the opera. He talked admirably about art, and in the eyes of the world he maintained his reputation as a great artist by his powers of conversation and criticism. There are many clever men in Paris who spend their lives in talking themselves out, and are content with a sort of drawing-room celebrity. Steinbach, emulating these emasculated but charming men, grew every day more averse to hard work. As soon as he began a thing, he was conscious of all its difficulties, and the discouragement that came over him enervated his will. Inspiration, the frenzy of intellectual procreation, flew swiftly away at the sight of this effete lover. Sculpture, like dramatic art, is at once the most difficult and the easiest of all arts. You have but to copy a model, and the task is done. But to give it a soul, to make it typical by creating a man or a woman, this is the sin of Prometheus. Such triumphs in the annals of sculpture may be counted as we may count the few poets among men. Michelangelo, Michel Colomb, Jean Goujon, Phidias, Praxiteles, Polycletes, Puget, Canova, Albert Dürer are the brothers of Milton, Virgil, Dante, Shakespeare, Tasso, Homer, and Molière. And such an achievement is so stupendous that a single statue is enough to make a man immortal, as Figaro, Lovelace, and Manon Lescaut have immortalized Beaumarchais, Richardson, and the Abbé Prévost. Superficial thinkers, and there are many in the artist world, have asserted that sculpture lives only by the nude, that it died with the Greeks, and that modern vesture makes it impossible. But in the first place, the ancients have left sublime statues entirely clothed, the Polyhymnia, the Julia, and others, and we have not found 1/10 of all their works. And then let any lover of art go to Florence and see Michelangelo's Penseroso, or to the Cathedral of Mainz and behold the Virgin by Albert Dürer, who has created a living woman out of ebony under her threefold drapery, with the most flowing, the softest hair that ever a waiting maid combed through. Let all the ignorant flock thither, and they will acknowledge that genius can give mind to drapery, to armor, to a robe, and fill it with a body, just as a man leaves the stamp of his individuality and habits of life on the clothes he wears. Sculpture is the perpetual realization of the fact which once and never again was in painting, called Raphael. The solution of this hard problem is to be found only in constant persevering toil. For merely to overcome the material difficulties to such an extent, the hand must be so practised, so dexterous and obedient, that the sculptor may be free to struggle soul to soul with the elusive moral element that he has to transfigure as he embodies it. If Paganini, who uttered his soul through the strings of his violin, spent 3 days without practising, he lost what he called the stops of his instrument, meaning the sympathy between the wooden frame, the strings, the bow, and himself. If he had lost this alliance, he would have been no more than an ordinary player. Perpetual work is the law of art, as it is the law of life, for art is idealized creation. Hence, great artists and perfect poets wait neither for commission nor for purchasers. They are constantly creating, today, tomorrow, always. The result is the habit of work, the unfailing apprehension of the difficulties which keep them in close intercourse with the muse and her productive forces. Canova lived in his studio, as Voltaire lived in his study, and so must Homer and Phidias have lived. While Lisbeth kept Wenceslas Steinbach in thraldom in his garret, he was on the thorny road trodden by all these great men, which leads to the Alpine heights of glory. Then happiness, in the person of Hortense, had reduced the poet to idleness, the normal condition of all artists, since to them idleness is fully occupied. Their joy is such as that of the pasha of a seraglio. They revel with ideas, they get drunk at the founts of intellect. Great artists, such as Steinbach, wrapped in reverie, are rightly spoken of as dreamers. They, like opium eaters, all sink into poverty, whereas if they had been kept up to the mark by the stern demands of life, they might have been great men. At the same time, these half-artists are delightful. Men like them and cram them with praise. They even seem superior to the true artists, who are taxed with conceit, unsociableness, contempt of the laws of society. This is why great men are the slaves of their work. Their indifference to outer things, their devotion to their work, make simpletons regard them as egotists, and they are expected to wear the same garb as the dandy who fulfills the trivial evolutions called social duties. These men want the lions of the Atlas to be combed and scented like a lady's poodle. These artists, who are too rarely matched to meet their fellows, fall into habits of solitary exclusiveness. They are inexplicable to the majority, which, as we know, consists mostly of fools, of the envious, the ignorant, and the superficial. Now you may imagine what part a wife should play in the life of these glorious and exceptional beings. She ought to be what, for 5 years, Lisbeth had been, but with the added offering of love, humble and patient love, always ready and always smiling. Hortense, enlightened by her anxieties as a mother, and driven by dire necessity, had discovered too late the mistakes she had been involuntarily led into by her excessive love. Still, the worthy daughter of her mother, her heart ached at the thought of worrying Wenceslas. She loved her dear poet too much to become his torturer, and she could foresee the hour when beggary awaited her, her child, and her husband. "Come, come, my child," said Lisbeth, seeing the tears in her cousin's lovely eyes. "You must not despair. A glassful of tears will not buy a plate of soup. How much do you want?" "Well, 5,000 or 6,000 francs." "I have but 3,000 at the most," said Lisbeth. "And what is Wenceslas doing now?" "He has had an offer to work in partnership with Stidmann at a table service for the Duc d'Herouville for 6,000 francs. Then Monsieur Chanor will advance 4,000 to repay Monsieur de Lora and Bridau, a debt of honor." "What, you have had the money for the statue and the bas-reliefs for Marshal Montcornet's monument, and you have not paid them yet?" "For the last 3 years," said Hortense, "we have spent 12,000 francs a year, and I have but 100 louis a year of my own. The Marshal's monument, when all the expenses were paid, brought us no more than 16,000 francs. Really and truly, if Wenceslas gets no work, I do not know what is to become of us. Oh, if only I could learn to make statues, I would handle the clay," she cried, holding up her fine arms. The woman, it was plain, fulfilled the promise of the girl. There was a flash in her eye, impetuous blood strong with iron flowed in her veins. She felt that she was wasting her energy in carrying her infant. "Ah, my poor little thing, a sensible girl should not marry an artist till his fortune is made, not while it is still to make." At this moment they heard voices. Stidmann and Wenceslas were seeing Schnurr to the door. Then Wenceslas and Stidmann came in again. Stidmann, an artist in vogue in the world of journalists, famous actresses, and courtesans of the better class, was a young man of fashion whom Valerie much wished to see in her rooms. Indeed, he had already been introduced to her by Claude Vignon. Stidmann had lately broken off an intimacy with Madame Schontz, who had married some months since and gone to live in the country. Valerie and Lisbeth, hearing of this upheaval from Claude Vignon, thought it well to get Steinbock's friend to visit in the Rue Vanneau. Stidmann, out of good feeling, went rarely to the Steinbocks, and as it happened that Lisbeth was not present when he was introduced by Claude Vignon, she now saw him for the first time. As she watched this noted artist, she caught certain glances from his eyes at Hortense, which suggested to her the possibility of offering him to the Countess Steinbock as a consolation if Wenceslas should be false to her. In point of fact, Stidmann was reflecting that if Steinbock were not his friend, Hortense, the young and superbly beautiful countess, would be an adorable mistress. It was this very notion, controlled by honor, that kept him away from the house. Lisbeth was quick to mark the significant awkwardness that troubles a man in the presence of a woman with whom he will not allow himself to flirt. "Very good-looking, that young man," she said in a whisper to Hortense. "Oh, do you think so?" she replied. "I never noticed him." "Stidmann, my good fellow," said Wenceslas in an undertone to his friend, "we are on no ceremony, you and I. We have some business to settle with this old girl." Stidmann bowed to the ladies and went away. "It is settled," said Wenceslas when he came in from taking leave of Stidmann. "But there are 6 months' work to be done, and we must live meanwhile." "There are my diamonds!" cried the young countess, with the impetuous heroism of a loving woman. A tear rose in Wenceslas' eye. "Oh, I am going to work," said he, sitting down by his wife and drawing her on his knee. "I will do odd jobs, a wedding chest, bronze groups." "But, my children," said Lisbeth, "for, as you know, you will be my heirs, and I shall leave you a very comfortable sum, believe me, especially if you help me to marry the Marshal. Nay, if we succeed in that quickly, I will take you all to board with me, you and Adeline. We should live very happily together. But for the moment, listen to the voice of my long experience. Do not fly to the Mont de Piete. It is the ruin of the borrower. I have always found that when the interest was due, those who had pledged their things had nothing wherewith to pay up, and then all is lost. I can get you a loan at 5% on your note of hand." "Oh, we are saved!" said Hortense. "Well then, child, Wenceslas had better come with me to see the lender, who will oblige him at my request. It is Madame Marneffe. If you flatter her a little, for she is as vain as a parvenue, she will get you out of the scrape in the most obliging way. Come yourself and see her, my dear Hortense." Hortense looked at her husband with the expression a man condemned to death must wear on his way to the scaffold. "Claude Vignon took Stidmann there," said Wenceslas. "He says it is a very pleasant house." Hortense's head fell. What she felt can only be expressed in one word. It was not pain, it was illness. "But, my dear Hortense, you must learn something of life," exclaimed Lisbeth, understanding the eloquence of her cousin's looks. "Otherwise, like your mother, you will find yourself abandoned in a deserted room, where you will weep like Calypso on the departure of Ulysses, and at an age when there is no hope of Telemachus," she added, repeating a jest of Madame Marneffe's. "We have to regard the people in the world as tools which we can make use of or let alone, according as they can serve our turn. Make use of Madame Marneffe now, my dears, and let her alone by and by. Are you afraid lest Wenceslas, who worships you, should fall in love with a woman 4 or 5 years older than himself, as yellow as a bundle of field peas, and—" "I would far rather pawn my diamonds," said Hortense. "Oh, never go there, Wenceslas, it is hell." "Hortense is right," said Steinbock, kissing his wife. "Thank you, my dearest," said Hortense, delighted. "My husband is an angel, you see, Lisbeth. He does not gamble, he goes nowhere without me. If he only could stick to work! Oh, I should be too happy. Why take us on show to my father's mistress, a woman who is ruining him and is the cause of troubles that are killing my heroic mother?" "My child, that is not where the cause of your father's ruin lies. It was his singer who ruined him, and then your marriage," replied her cousin. "Bless me! Why, Madame Marneffe is of the greatest use to him. However, I must tell no tales." "You have a good word for everybody, dear Betty." Hortense was called into the garden by hearing the child cry. Lisbeth was left alone with Wenceslas. "You have an angel for your wife, Wenceslas," said she. "Love her as you ought, never give her cause for grief." "Yes, indeed, I love her so well that I do not tell her all," replied Wenceslas. "But to you, Lisbeth, I may confess the truth. If I took my wife's diamonds to the Mont de Piete, we should be no further forward." "Then borrow of Madame Marneffe," said Lisbeth. "Persuade Hortense, Wenceslas, to let you go there, or else, bless me, go there without telling her." "That is what I was thinking of," replied Wenceslas, "when I refused for fear of grieving Hortense. Listen to me, I care too much for you both not to warn you of your danger. If you go there, hold your heart tight in both hands, for the woman is a witch. All who see her adore her. She is so wicked, so inviting, she fascinates men like a masterpiece. Borrow her money, but do not leave your soul in pledge. I should never be happy again if you were false to Hortense. Here she is, not another word. I will settle the matter." "Kiss Lisbeth, my darling," said Wenceslas to his wife. "She will help us out of our difficulties by lending us her savings." And he gave Lisbeth a look which she understood. "Then I hope you mean to work, my dear treasure," said Hortense. "Yes, indeed," said the artist. "I will begin to-morrow." "To-morrow is our ruin," said his wife with a smile. "Now, my dear child, say yourself whether some hindrance has not come in the way every day, some obstacle or business." "Yes, very true, my love." "Here," cried Steinbock, striking his brow, "here I have swarms of ideas. I mean to astonish all my enemies. I am going to design a service in the German style of the 16th century, the romantic style, foliage twined with insects, sleeping children, newly invented monsters, chimeras, real chimeras, such as we dream of. I see it all. It will be undercut, light, and yet crowded. Chanor was quite amazed. And I wanted some encouragement, for the last article on Montcornet's monument had been crushing. At a moment in the course of the day when Lisbeth and Wenceslas were left together, the artist agreed to go on the morrow to see Madame Marneffe. He either would win his wife's consent, or he would go without telling her. End of chapter 21.